and welcome to another episode of Talking with Aleesha. This is a series where I talk to just extraordinary women. The purpose of the series is to shed light on stories of women that we don't really usually get to hear, and it's a great way to show women in a more diverse and authentic way. So today I have a really special guest who I'm so excited to talk to. It's Elizabeth Arif Fear. So nice to meet you today.
And you?
So, Elizabeth is actually an award winning writer and activist. She founded her own organization, Voice of Salaam, which means Voice of Peace. And it's actually an internationally recognized human rights and interfaith platform. And she's just done a ton of work in the human rights sector. And I cannot wait to talk about. So I'm really excited for today's episode. So, hi Elizabeth, how are you today?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for having me on the show.
No, it's great. Thank you for taking the time out to speak to me today. So, my first question is I would just love to know a little bit more about you, where you're from, and what brought you here today.
Yeah, so I'm originally from the Midlands. My background is British Italian. I first started becoming interested in human rights issues when I was at sixth form. And there was an amnesty group, and I'd never heard of sort of any of this type of thing before. And it seemed really, really intriguing. So I started doing campaigning and fundraising with the student group. And it really went from there, really. So I was doing things at uni, and then with Amnesty, my local group back at home. And then I changed religion during my time at university. I became a Muslim. I was formerly Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So that obviously influenced a lot of my interest in terms of Islamic feminism.
Yeah.
And when I was in Spain, I was keen to sort of still be in the loop with kind of activism in the UK. So I set up Voice of Salaam, which is my online blog. And from baby steps, it's now grown quite well. So Voice of Salaam is a platform to raise awareness of human rights and interfaith issues. We're an interfaith team. There's me, myself, and two colleagues, one Christian, Julian, and one Jewish, Stephen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really, really nice space to raise awareness of different interfaith issues, especially anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and with the increase of hate crime, and really just, get voices out there.
That's really interesting. So, interfaith is a really niche kind of charity and platform. You don't really see really different faiths merging together. You see like these Christian charities, you see Muslim charities, but they're pretty segregated from what I've seen. So what inspired you? Is it because of your own experiences of changing religion? What inspired you to create an interfaith platform and encourage different faiths to get together? And yeah.
Well, interfaith is quite a sort of specific sector, but there are some really, really great organisations actually, nationally, internationally. I'm part of a few. But in terms of the blog, really it started more as a human rights platform. I suppose naturally, given the fact that I come from a faith background, and I wanted to talk about, the similarities between faith groups, that sort of, bringing that message of harmony. And then it was also the time of when Trump was running for election, so I wanted to talk about how we're not a danger, etc. So it just kind of came out through them, really. So sort of me as a person with my faith interests, what's going on in society at the moment. And often I think people kind of think of human rights and religion as separate, but really we're talking about sort of cohesion, rights, all these sort of social issues. I think, especially given the fact that many people do have a faith, not everybody. And for me, it will kind of just sort of merge naturally from there, really.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So when did you create the platform? Is it pretty, how long has Voice of Salaam been?
So it was in late 2015 in December. So it's been a couple of years now already.
That's good though, because it hasn't been that long and it's still growing a lot.
Yeah, no, it is growing. I'm pleased with the progress. It was slow burning at the beginning, but it's been growing, which is good, alhamdulillah.
And as a weaver, what are some of the struggles that you faced, do you think, and what do you think one thing is that like more light should be shed on to help weavers?
Yeah, something that I struggled with, I didn't really realise at the time, but now I do, was coming across negative, toxic, overly orthodox kind of interpretations of the faith that made it difficult for me to convert in the first place, even though obviously nobody was actively sort of discouraging me, everyone was keen. But in terms of the practice and the teachings, and then how that kind of impacted on me sort of spiritually and emotionally. And now that, you know, I'm older, I'm wiser, I'm more mature, I've kind of gone through a sort of period of, you know, like self-growth, rising self-confidence, all that sort of thing. And obviously you learn about things, you know, from a secular and a faith-based perspective as you get older. Now I can see things and sort of speak out against things and sort of discard things which I think are really, really unhealthy. So whilst people warn against that, I think there are some really, really toxic narratives out there, and that can be challenging if you haven't got the right people around you, which I did, thankfully. But even then, it's difficult. That can be, that's alarming. So yeah, that's really kind of my main thing.
And especially when you're a revert, you might not know that many Muslims, and like you said, it's hard just to find your path. I think that's definitely one thing. With Islam, a lot of people have this kind of, it's very rigid, it's very face on kind of thing. So you're from the UK.
Yeah.
So as a Muslim woman in the UK, do you think your experience has been completely different as a Christian woman?
Well, as a Christian, I didn't really self-recognise on a sort of social level as a Christian. I grew up in a Christian, well, it was mixed, but my dad isn't a Christian, but he agreed with my mother to bring me up as a Christian. So I was brought up in a Christian household, but not sort of very practicing or devout. It was more in terms of basic teachings and behaviour and kind of the morals. So it was actually when I started to look at how can I kind of go back to church, actually I ended up converting to Islam. So I've not had that much experience with sort of really being an active member of the Christian community and self-identifying with that. So it's different experiences, really. And obviously you've got the whole sort of Muslims are a religious minority, but I'm not a BAME woman, for example. So there's different kind of elements there, you know. So it's different, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. And what do you think in the UK particularly are some of the struggles that Muslim women face that you wish more light was spread on?
Well, it is talked about a lot, as it should be. But obviously women, visibly Muslim women who wear hijab, they are target to hate crime. So we've heard stories about people having their hijabs ripped off, etc. So with the increase in hate crime and anti-Muslim hate, obviously, that does affect Muslim women who are visible. So there's that. And then there's a lot of debates around sort of covering, non-covering, and that can get quite polemic as well, I think, But then there's also, you know, other issues that need to be dealt with, such as, you know, forced marriage and that kind of area of things as well. So obviously it's quite broad.
Because I'm a Muslim as well, with me, I feel like one of the biggest issues that I've faced and I see a lot is kind of this culture clash or identity crisis kind of thing, where it's like we're living in Britain, where sometimes a lot of the values are different than what we've been brought up with, and it's kind of like the dual personalities kind of thing, where one side saying one thing, but then what you see around is completely different. And so these kind of things, what's Voice of Salam's mission, and what issues does Voice of Salam particularly tackle?
So in terms of Islam, I've written a fair bit for Voice of Salam and outside of Voice of Salam on Islamic feminism issues. So that would be some of the cultural interpretations, but also I think it's important to not always label as cultural what some people justify as theological interpretations or practice, but is incorrect. I mean, I don't like to use the word incorrect, but abusive, shall we say.
Yeah.
So a piece that I've written for another platform, She Speaks, We Hear, which I'll be sharing on Voice of Salaam, Islamic feminism, so issues around sort of how which has also been covered on the blog itself, how we address interpretations around the obviously the impermissibility of hitting women, which is obviously completely impermissible.
Yeah.
But I've recently touched on how there's unhealthy narratives around that in terms of, metaphorical hitting. Oh, you can use a miswak, etc., which I think is obviously alarming. So issues such as that.
You can use a what? Sorry, I didn't get that part. You can use a. What was the
Right,
last
sorry.
sentence? No,
So
it's.
whilst most people will say it's impermissible to hit a woman,
Yeah.
as it is, certain scholars, etc., will say that you can use a miswak, which is like a toothbrush used by the Prophet.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah,
it's a sort of
yeah.
still taking the verse literally, but in a sort of trying to make out it's more kind of metaphorical or more just a kind of jest act, which I think is clearly wrong. So I've covered on the blog issues about how you translate that surah, issues about how people perceive women who cover, as it's a choice, not a forced action, although it can be in certain cases. I do recommend checking out the 10 misconceptions on Muslim women on Voice of Salaam, and that covers a range of issues. So common misconceptions about Muslim women.
I'll link it below. I'll give that link below. Yeah. There's as you rightly said, there's just so many different. It's such a there's so many layers to what kind of issues Muslim women face, and this is just in the UK. Around the world, there's even more different issues. One of the issues that you did cover was the hijab. I used to wear the hijab as previously, but a lot of times I felt like it was kind of suffocating, where it's for me it was either you wear it or you don't. um and there are times where I want to wear it again, but it's that thing where it's either I want to wear it or I can wear it or I can't wear it. If I do, for instance, take it off and put it on again, people are just gonna think like she's not taking Islam seriously. So what do you think about the current definition of hijab, and do you agree with it? Do you think perceptions need to change, or what's your opinion on it?
Well, I think that any religious practice is personal, so it's not up to anybody to judge. And actually, while I was discussing with people close to me about taking mine off, as I did recently, people were a lot more open to the idea of, as you said, experimenting with, so wearing it, not wearing it, trying in different spaces. So ultimately, what you choose to do is up to you. I mean, obviously, it's quite a big statement, and if you believe in it, I never wanted to take it off while I was wearing it until I eventually did want to take it off and took it off. But that's not up to anybody to judge. So I think that it's important to not judge other people, and you should have the freedom as every woman to experiment with perhaps how you're feeling or not feeling, because you shouldn't feel suffocated by anything. I did feel suffocated by it eventually. I chose to wear it. I loved it. I wore it for about 7-8 years, but I did feel suffocated by it, and then I took it off. But that's my own personal journey. I think it's important that we acknowledge women's agency. So women who choose to wear it must continue to have the right to wear it, just as some women in other countries don't choose to wear it, but they're not allowed to take it off. But in the context of the UK, it's important to not sort of over politicize hijab. In the UK, it should be primarily a discussion centered around women. I think I wouldn't want to sort of delve too much into the is it fard, is it not fard, all of that thing. So I don't want to impose my view on other people. And I have a lot of, I work with a lot of Muslim women who do wear it and have full respect for them. I think, as you were saying about the fluidity, I think Islam as a whole is meant to be a religion of ease, and if you're not comfortable with something, then you have to take a step back. And sort of, readdress that. So while I would say if somebody's wearing it, they should wear it every day, that's coming from me, and I don't think I need to wear it. That fluidity needs to be there, but I think people are a lot less judgmental than we think.
It's just with the scarf hijab, there's not a lot of burden. Maybe sometimes we bring it on ourselves and we overthink things as well.
I've done that with a lot of elements in my faith. Not praying properly and then thinking, oh, but I'm wearing hijab, I shouldn't wear hijab because,
Yeah.
I realised sort of how much our own, like I was saying about toxic narratives, also I realised some of it was me and having these sort of expectations of how I should or shouldn't practice and, self-perceptions of the self, etc. So I think it's important to strip it all away, and whether people judge or don't judge, just to kind of focus on yourself and how you feel, because ultimately it's a relationship between you and God, really. So
that's completely true. And the hijab is it's one of the only things that's more outward. I think that's why people criticize it more, people talk about it more, or people fixate on it more, and especially because it's to do with a woman's body. I feel like anything like that, people just target women more. It's just another
it's a visible sign of faith. So unfortunately, it's used by Islamophobes as it's something visible that they can see. Not recognising women's choice obviously forms part of their arguments, where they sort of talk about the submissive Muslim woman, which is the opposite. As I said, we choose it for ourselves. There's a lot around it.
But thank you for giving your 2 cents and your insights. It's interesting just to see how other Muslim women feel about their journey with the hijab. And you've also written a poetry book on human rights.
Yes.
That's really interesting. It's really interesting, and you cover a lot of topics. I read the kind of, you get a free preview. It's really interesting.
Yeah, there's a short preview on the website.
Yeah, it's really interesting. What inspired you to do that, a poetry book?
Well, I loved poetry as a child, but sort of stopped writing and kind of fell out of touch with it. So when I started writing poetry again, I was obviously writing things for the blog, etc. And it was around the time that in Syria, in eastern Ghouta, when it was under siege, and it was just so terrible. People trapped in an area. And obviously the war had been going on for years, and we knew sort of how tragic it was. And I'd written things and I'd spoken to people about it, so asylum seekers and an organisation that works in Syria and all sorts of things. But it got to the point where it just kind of became a bit more emotional. Not to say that I was detached before, but when aid could get through. But at this point, it really needed to be, the conflict needs to be resolved. There needs to be a political solution.
Yeah.
And I just sort of reflected, oh gosh, imagine if it was me in that, where you've literally trapped and you've got very limited food. And I sort of talked about all the kind of practical things on interviews and blogs, but then it was just a really, really sad time, and I can't imagine what they're going through. So I often get ideas when I'm just sort of on my own walking around the place. Thinking of ideas for sort of blogs and things. So I just thought, what if it were me? And I thought, oh, I need to write that down. I just felt like I needed to write a poem, kind of get those emotions out.
Yeah.
And it was really exciting because I hadn't written a poem in years. So I went home, and that night, I wanted to write it. I thought, I'll go to sleep, but I couldn't sleep. I was like, oh, I need to write this poem. So it was about 2, 3 in the morning. I wrote this poem, and it just kind of flowed. And then the next day I shared it with friends and family. I thought, oh, look at me, I've written a poem. And they really liked it. And my friend said, you should write an anthology. I thought, oh, okay. And I went to her, really, because from there I just started writing more and more poetry, and I really enjoy it. It's such a great means of expression, and then I realised I could talk about so many more important issues. So the book covers FGM, issues that I'm either working on or aware of, or that, are being talked about. So it's sort of FGM, modern slavery. I could talk about things that were happening in my life, responding to them. So some of the abuse that I'd received, or some of the situations I was in, or things that were kind of close to me. And it was really, really fun to write, and it went from there, really. And I was really, really fortunate that I had some really, really good encouragement from friends, and I put the manuscript together, sent it off to publishers, and then one got back to me, and then went from there, really.
That's really good, and it's just amazing how, I guess, you can have more than one passion, and it all kind of interlinks. That is really good. I'll link.
Yeah, well, it's the sort of the writing, the human rights. It just came out as another. It lets you be a lot more kind of emotionally expressive.
Yeah.
I mean, blogs are great, I think some people respond to different things. And I think the great thing about the poetry is people who may not be so sort of keen or aware of some of the human rights issues, they can really read and connect on an emotional level with these poems.
Yeah.
And so just, a wider variety of kind of writing material out there.
Yeah, it's really good. And so you just mentioned that you covered a lot of issues like FGM, and in your blog and so on, you've covered a lot of issues around the world, like, for instance, child marriage. And what do you think is one big issue that's happening right now that you wish got more attention?
Well, they're all deserving.
Yeah.
Something which I don't think has been talked about a lot is modern slavery. I mean, it is talked about a lot, but if you're not within those circles, perhaps you won't hear about it enough. So, human trafficking, modern slavery. So, I'm part of a campaigning organisation in London, and we're trying to raise awareness of this. And I think a lot of people really aren't aware of it. So, historically, slavery was supposedly ended, but it's not. And even in the UK, well, modern slavery, you've got sexual exploitation, so forced prostitution. You've got labour exploitation, so people who are either being forced to work without salary or the very, very low salary, so, restaurants, factories, etc. There's organ trafficking. There's forced marriage falls into that, forced begging. There's a lot of different forms of modern slavery, and I mean, if you ask people around you, are you aware, for example, in London, that in this city people are going to be living in said conditions? They probably wouldn't be aware of it. So I think that that's an issue which I would like more people to be aware of. And then in being aware of that, they can help combat that, so they can spot the signs. Yeah. So people perhaps, but, if you're in a car wash, for example, and they're not wearing protective equipment, or everything's cash in hand and the boss comes and takes the money, aggressive behaviour. There's all sorts of little signs that you can spot, and then you can report to the Modern Slavery Helpline, and then hopefully something can be done about that. So I think that's something I'd like people to be more aware of, just so they know these things are happening, and then also to take action. But obviously there's lots of things going on, but I do think modern slavery is something that not enough people are aware of, and we're not talking about enough.
No, even I'm gonna research more into it now after you've talked about it, because you don't think that it's happening here or in your everyday life, or that it's happening around you.
Yeah, it could be somebody in the house on your road.
Yeah, so yeah, I agree with you on that. And so your non-profit, is that your main career, or is it just like a passion is that what you're doing full time now?
Well, Voice of Salaam isn't officially registered as a non-profit. I would like to get it registered. So once I find a board, there's obviously formal procedures to go through. I don't want to call it a side project, because that would kind of imply it's not important to me. It is important to me, but it's not my paid job. No, I work in international development, and I'm a copywriter. So writing is all connected. And then obviously in my own time, I do Voice of Salaam and lots of other kind of voluntary initiatives as well.
Yeah, that's really good. And I wanted to ask personally for me, but if anyone's listening, I wouldn't call this a side project as well, but you have to do a job to get the bills paid, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What advice would you give on how to balance it? And sometimes you feel like you're not dedicating enough time to, like, there's more you could do. How would you balance it, and how do you balance it?
Well, I think it's important that there's only so many hours in the day, and this is something that I'm guilty of. You need to give time for self-care, and, the more tired you get, the less productive you're going to be. Also, when we're talking about sort of charitable causes, money isn't really... People don't see the value in, you're paid to do it, rather than you're not paid to do it. There's so many great organisations out there that people are running without funds, etc. Or, there's so many volunteers involved. So I think we need to get out of this mindset of, well, this is a paid job, so this is more legitimate, and this is just a side thing. If you're passionate about it, and it really sort of, is part of your life, and it's something you love, it's not a side project. It's something that you're doing and that you're passionate about. And, setting up a charity and requires procedures and time. some things are small scale but incredibly impactful. We don't all have to sort of make a large INGO to feel like it's worthwhile.
Yeah.
So I think recognising the value in projects, recognising the need that, there's only so many hours in the day, we need to take care of ourselves. I mean, ideally, the best thing to do, as I'm able to do, is combine your sort of skills into your paid and unpaid, so it kind of forms part of a larger sort of circle of what you're doing. But I think really just encouraging people. I mean, I often went to, oh, it's just a blog. Well, it is just a blog, but it's something that I'm really passionate about, and it is, it's making a difference. So that kind of self-confidence in your projects, obviously getting people involved could spread the workload. But, the thing is, I mean, I love working on Voice of Salaam when I'm not at work. Is it a hobby? Is it a job? But if it's something you love, it doesn't really become a job. It just becomes something that you want to do and you want to spend your time on. So as people always say, do something that you're passionate about, and don't beat yourself up about it. You can't work all hours of the day. Prioritize and just see how it goes.
Yeah, and I love the point where you're saying that it's not a side project, it's something that you do that you're passionate about. And with like work, it's I think there should be like you can do more than one thing, that kind of
Definitely, yeah.
mantra. So and you can easily change jobs, or you can find different passions. Or like you said, you did Voice of Slam, but you also wrote a book on poetry, and in the future hopefully you'll do all these different things where it's like, I guess it's a similar theme to what you're doing, so it's non-profit activism, but
Yeah.
it's so many different things. And I think that with a lot of things, people don't even start, because starting is one of the hardest parts, in my opinion. People don't start doing it because they're like, oh, for instance, the workload, or they might not get paid, or so. The advice I would give as well, just looking at it, is if you are passionate, you should just do it, even if it's once a month,
Definitely.
or if it's just a couple of times um, a week, or whatever you can, because it is better than nothing. And who knows who you might meet. And I think like the one of the most valuable things that I've had from it is like the connections, the kind of people that you meet with similar mindsets that are doing similar things.
Oh,
And
yes,
it's
definitely, yeah.
really encouraging just to see all these different people with the same mission as you. So that's one thing that I love about just doing a passion as well. And what are some of like the organizations, maybe from the UK as well, like local, that you look up to, or that have a really good message that you would love for more people to know about?
Yeah, so there's one organisation which I'm super passionate about called Nisa Nashim.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a national Jewish Muslim women's network. So Nisa and Nashim both mean women in Arabic and Hebrew. And this is a really, really great organisation. The only one of its kind in Europe. There's a similar one in the US called Sisterhood of Salam Shalom. So this is a great organisation based in London, but with local groups spread up around the country, as far up as Scotland. And the idea is to bring Muslim and Jewish women together. So to build those bonds, break down those kind of stereotypes that, Muslims and Jews don't get on, foster leadership skills, build these friendships and, the trust there. And also grassroots up to top level, tackle Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And this organisation is super welcoming, and there's just such a positive vibe. The conference in April, there was 250 Muslim and Jewish women. Having so many women in that space, women were great kind of bond makers, friendship makers. So that's a really, really great organisation that I recommend. In today's climate, it's really important that we both stand up to anti-Muslim hate, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And you get to meet so many wonderful women, talk about real issues. So that's an organisation I really, really recommend. I'd also recommend getting involved in local interfaith projects. So I'm based in Croydon and do work in London. So it depends whereabouts you're based, but reach out to your local synagogue, church, mosque, see if there's any sort of interfaith projects going on there, especially as it's Ramadan coming up. That's a great time to go to some interfaith iftars and connect and see what's happening. So I think connecting in your local community with interfaith organisations. Lisa Hashim is great. That's one of my faves.
It's really. I'm from Manchester. They're not. They're based in
They
London.
do. They have a group in
Oh, they have a
Manchester.
group in Manchester.
Check it out.
Yeah, I'll make sure to check it out. It sounds really interesting. Yeah, it sounds really good community as well.
It is.
And
It's really, really welcoming.
yeah. So I think one of the best ways with activism, with human rights, is especially when you sometimes can't go like to these different places where all like these atrocities are happening, is to raise awareness, and that's exactly what you're doing. That's exactly what Voice of Salam's doing. So thank you for just spending so much time raising these issues, because they are issues that need to be talked about more. And I completely agree with like how you're going about and how you're doing it, and it's really encouraging to see as well.
Thank you.
So what's the future for Voice of Salam? Do you have any events, or do you have any things that you want to?
Yeah, so we're recruiting for more writers, for more volunteers. So we're in the process of speaking to some new people. So if people are interested, get in touch. We're always looking for new writers, people with extra skills such as video, because we'd like to do more kind of offline as well as online
Yeah,
activity. So the future for Voice of Salam is have more writers, more contributions, more talking, more voices.
yeah.
Set it up as a fully registered NGO with my board, etc. And then hopefully take it from there. So building the presence, building the readership, definitely.
That sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to see it grow, inshallah.
Inshallah.
And yeah, I think that's I've had asked everything. Are there any questions that you want to ask, or anything that you want to add?
Sneaky plug from me. So the poetry book is called What If It Were You, and it's available on Amazon.
Yeah, I'll link it below.
Do check out the reviews. There's some lovely reviews on there. I think it's a really interesting book. So if you're interested in poetry or exploring human rights issues, that's definitely one to check out. But yeah, Aleesha, so how did you form your platform?
Oh, so the tables have turned. With mine, I did engineering, and I knew engineering was a pretty male dominated degree before I entered, but I didn't know like the extent just before I entered it. So it is very male dominated, but what really hit me was one day I usually study and I look at YouTube videos and to help me revise, and all the YouTube videos were just of one kind of person. They were old, they were white, they were male, and
Mm.
that's when it kind of hit me where no wonder like more girls don't take it. And when I researched into it more, it actually affects girls at such a young age. So girls as young as 6 years old, because of like the stigmas, and because of like how people perceive engineers and people in technology and people in just STEM subjects, they think that they can't do it. That's why I wanted to become more vocal. So I started off by making maths videos on YouTube, just to be that person that I didn't get to see. And it kind
Yeah.
of grew from there, where the more I looked into it, there were so many different like kind of women's issues that are local to me and that's like international as well, that I just started getting passionate about. So yeah, that's when my passion grew, and I love doing it. I love just meeting new women, spreading awareness on it, and so yeah, it started from that. And I didn't realize how big of an issue it is. As growing up, I always thought, yeah, men, women, they're equal. But if you look kind of deeper into it, there's so many different like kind of inequalities. And as you're doing, I think the best way what I can do is just raise awareness on these issues and meet amazing women like you, who are doing
Thank you.
amazing things. So yeah, that's kind of it like in a nutshell.